Hey, what's going on, everybody?
Hello, hello. Here's another one.
Here's another one. I'm John Davis.
Chris Neal.
Welcome to Living 360. It's been a little bit. We're excited to be back. We've got a
Yes.
really juicy, spicy, hot
It's a fun one.
episode.
This will be a good one, yeah.
Today we are talking about sexual health and satisfaction.
Yes.
So,
And we're going to try not to get in trouble.
let's talk about sex, baby. So, today's episode, we actually are going to dive into this. This is really interesting. It's one of the big things that we look at in our clinic. It's still a little bit taboo, which is funny because this idea of sexual health and this idea of investing in your sexual health after a certain stage in your life really, really aligns with everything that we do in the clinic, which is there's sort of an idea after a certain age, all that stuff just shuts off. It's kind of like,
Oh, I can tell you that's not the case, though.
Yeah.
Well, and it shouldn't be taboo because really, like when we have patients that come to us that just don't feel well, they try and describe this to their regular doctors and the doctors don't get it. Oh, your numbers look fine. And they come and see us. And just a basic open-ended question, hey, how do you feel?
Yeah.
How is life going? You know, how is they will begin to list the things. It's interesting, the things that are of most priority to them.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll say, you know, I have aches and pains, or I feel I've got brain fog during the day. And you know what? Like, my sex drive is horrible. Like, and they can be in 70s and 80s, you know, it doesn't matter. You know, age really doesn't matter when it comes to this. So if this is a part of how you feel and how you get through the day and what's important to you, then somebody's got to take care of it. You know? Like, and that's what we're here for. And oftentimes it is intertwined and wrapped into the rest of your health.
Right.
So we cannot, in good conscience, look at health and say that we're champions of health and fitness and everything, and not talk about that.
Right. Well, and I think that your concept of your relationship to yourself and your sexual health and your sexual expressiveness, you know, how you connect to and relate to yourself as a sexual being is something that is so pivotal. And it's something that we actually as a culture don't talk a lot about. So it's not about the frequency of sex. It's not about how often you are having sex and how much of it you're doing. It's about how you relate to yourself sexually. How do you relate to your performance sexually and your feeling of sexual wholeness? And so
That's deep.
Yeah, straight
That's
up.
deep.
Straight up.
Yeah. That's a lot on a much deeper, and we're gonna get into all of those levels. Like, so that's we're gonna get.
But
there.
it is, you know, it's powerful and it's important. We have people that come in and they will start to finally sort of open up, and we don't look for like, well, you know, you should be having sex every day or whatever. We're really looking about, do you feel satisfaction? Do you feel like you are still in connection with yourself sexually, or are you doing that thing that humans do after a certain point where they're like, well, you know, I'm 40 something and that section is, you know, offline. But it's like, it's not really offline.
Yeah.
You know, it's something that we're kind of taught to be okay with. And actually, to some extent, for a large chapter in our history, we were taught that that's like a normal thing, that basically like you have the kids and then that department shuts off.
Well,
you know?
what's interesting, and I wanted to touch into the history of how societies think and teach about sex too. Like, because if you really go back in history, like historically, sex is crazy. Like it's all over the place. It's literally all over the map. Yeah. You know, so like the first, you know, we might touch on, you know, like toys, like sexual. The first sexual toy would, like, they actually have it in kind of an ancient fossil record. They found one. They found a sex toy that's literally aged at 28,000 years.
And this
28,000 years old.
This is the thing that's so funny, is that we do this thing where we rewrite history, but it's everywhere. It's like they were making this out of clay.
Yeah.
You know?
Camel dung, to be more precise.
I thought clay was better.
Yeah, clay too, but camel dung was in it. But yeah, so obviously our methods have gotten more sterile with those things, but how we believe in it is quite different. Like in ancient Greece, and this is interesting because you know there was the Greece Empire and the Roman Empire. So in ancient Greece, sex was much more of an open, acceptable thing, and even same-sex relationships were very, very acceptable, especially for men. It was even considered you were a part of the elite. Mm-hmm. It was kind of expected. that you had male sexual partners, even out within or outside of your marriage or whatever, and it was very accepted. But in Roman, when the Romans came along, it was very, very different. Like it was very suppressed, and so many times in history, like we see the either the political or the religious scene, sometimes they're intertwined. They intentionally suppress certain aspects of our daily life and fitness, by the way, too, so for political reasons. So like in the Roman times, like a woman could actually sue her husband and take her husband to court if he ejaculated outside of her in any way, shape, or form.
Didn't they try to pass a bill recently that's almost exactly like that somewhere in America? I feel like I just read something about this that was really kind of like a complex bill that basically said that any sort of orgasm that's not for
procreation purposes,
right, is considered like you can be fined.
So whenever politics and starts getting involved with that aspect, I'm always very wary of that. But yeah, that was the Roman Empire. So and it wasn't that far, distance in time, but like I thought it was interesting. Medieval times, was very, very suppressive. That's when the Catholic Church in particular, that like they really, really suppressed that. And then so a lot of the ways that we think about things now is a culmination or a trickle down effect of our past and our history.
You want to know what's interesting about the political / socio, whatever the wording is, component to that's fascinating. They did a study on this with Hitler. And it was one of the most, I know I had to bring out the H word, but they did. They did an interesting study that talked about some of the formulas of dictatorship or imposing control. And one of the primary devices that's consistently utilized, which is why we see it oscillate over the course of our history, is sexual shame, the impregnating of ideology with sexual shame. But the reason why that's so fascinating is that what it actually does on a psychological level is it makes people a lot easier to control. Why? This is wild. I thought this was really interesting. People that are sexually actualized or sexually confident and comfortable are much harder to condition. They are much more likely to listen to their inner voice. So they will make their own judgments about what is right and wrong. I don't fully understand what the actual direct reason that is, but if you are sexually confident, comfortable, without shame, you are much more likely to say, is this right or is this wrong? But if you are not, if you have sexual shame within you, it's a lot more likely that you're going to listen to somebody outside of you who's going to tell you this is what's right and this is what's wrong, which is why anytime we see dictatorships rise, anytime we see any sort of the establishment of any sort of a tyrannical governing body, they always start with women. So they do things like abortion. They start, then they go to LGBTQ. They try to target things that will create a sense of inner shame about how you express your sexual side of being a human. And by doing that, it becomes a lot easier to control groups of people into saying, hey, this is what's right and wrong. These are the things that are right and wrong. Don't trust your own judgment. Listen to what I'm saying. So we see that pattern through history. We kind of go through sexual revolutions, and then we get sexual suppression, and then we go back through another sexual revolution, and then we go through sexual repression.
That makes total sense, actually. Yeah. And I think about that, like that was very well said. But like when I'm watching the news and I see one of these crazy fools do something out there, drive the car through, Mardi Gras or something. Yeah. Like that's one of the thoughts that floats in my mind.
Oh God, you're going to say this, aren't you?
Yeah. It's like,
you are going to say this,
is this guy even getting laid at all? Like, that's all he needs. Please, just get him some, and then he won't have the time or the energy to do stuff like that.
Chris Neal, 2028, president for 2028.
Hey, like, you know what? How many problems could that fix?
Everybody getting some in 2020. Write his name in on the ballot.
Yep. Get some.
It's
the truth though.
It's interesting. And so, what's fascinating in our current, just because I love the history of this topic, the current phase that we're in as a culture is sort of like the post Freudian era, which is really interesting because before Freud, you had a lot more sexual fluency. It looked in some ways sort of like right before our current political, oscillation of hyper demonization of different types of expressions of sexuality. That started in this round with Freud, who basically came in. Before Freud, you didn't have all of these hyper categorizations. You had what was called a homosocial society. So women spent time with women, men spent time with men. You had a lot of same-sex relationships. In general, you still had marriage was a really pivotal part of society, but for different reasons. You had men that live with men, women that live with women. It was a very commonplace thing. And then over time, you have the same sort of infiltration of religious ideology. And then you also had, this influence that came from these European scientists that were doing eugenics. And during the process of eugenics, they sort of stumbled onto this entirely other issue of, oh, we got all these people that are out here having happy sex, and this is another problem to this hierarchy. We need to go in here. And so over time, they started categorizing all of these subcultures. And so they didn't have a name. We were all just sort of fluid. You didn't have gay, straight. You didn't have any of that. You just sort of had this fluidity.
Yeah, that didn't come about until much as an actual social construct. That came much later.
Yeah. So it's interesting. And so anyways, all of that to say is we look through our history and then we look to the present moment. What's really cool about our science, what we work with in our industry, and even when you see this in mental health too, is this idea that it's like, hey, you've been conditioned to basically think that you need to have sex to have a kid. You should kind of enjoy it, but like once you've got the kids thing, you need to just focus on being a responsible adult who does not, have great sex. You shouldn't, if it happens to you, great, but you shouldn't invest in it. You should not invest in your physical ability to engage in great sex. And it's really sort of like you just accept whatever rate at which that's declining in you. Yeah. And you just sit there and kind of envy people that might be in their 60s,
if you don't, 70s. There's something wrong with you.
Like there might be some of your friends that are like, I'm still having great sex, but you kind of just assume it's like they were just chosen by my life to be able to have great sex their whole life, and I just gotta womp, 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 womp.
But see, we fight that mentality with all different aspects. Back in my 20s, I was 140 pounds, and I wish I could get back there. But that's never going to happen again. I'd be happy at 160. It's like, well, hold on.
And they get shamed for that. It's like, well, why are you trying to stay all young?
Yeah,
you need to be aging gracefully.
Don't get me and my patients started on that term. Yeah. So we have this historical background that's inside all of us. We can't really get that out. We can't extract that completely. We can understand that it's there and learn how to communicate and how to work through that and how to find ourselves, right? So two things. I brought a game. Okay. I brought a game.
Thank God. I was worried.
It's going to be good. It's going to be good. And so John does not know about any of this. Okay. So I brought a little game.
Welcome to a day in my life.
I got to keep him on his toes.
Sneak attack.
Got to keep him on his toes. It's fun. So we're going to start the game with a little definition. Okay. And this is how all of the history of all of this stuff is pervaded up through. Okay. And what happens in kind of a fun and crazy sense, we have these things called kinks and fetishes. Okay. So now we're going to talk about this. So what is the difference between a kink and a fetish? I actually didn't know this. I had to look it up.
I actually don't know this.
Okay. So a fetish is something that's involved around an object.
Okay.
Or a body part or something, and not necessarily a sexual activity. So a kink actually has to do with the sexual activity itself.
Okay. That's interesting.
So there's all different types of fetishes. A very popular one is the foot fetish, right? So I was reading, I was doing some in-depth research on my computer, trying to make sure my wife didn't catch me. And
what
I came
is the search history?
Sorry, sweetheart. It's actually for a reason. It's for work, I promise. I came across a Dr. Kyle Zrinchik.
Okay.
He's a PhD and he's a sex therapist, and he had a list of the 25 top most common kinks and fetishes that he sees in his office.
Hmm.
Okay, and so as a part of this game, put your right hand up. I swear to be honest.
Ooh. I plead the fifth. I plead the fifth.
Man, we almost had him. So we're gonna go through this list, and I'm gonna I want you to just let me know if any of these ring a bell.
Okay.
Okay. If any of these do it for you.
All right.
And I'll tell you for me too.
I'm under oath.
The first one, and some of these we might not know, so we're gonna need to get definitions of it. I think it's fun, and there's no shame or I'm not judging anybody if these are your things or whatever, but so the first one is BDSM. We've all heard of that, and maybe we don't know what it means.
Yeah.
Bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so ring a bell?
Yeah,
you like that? Okay, yeah. He's
I didn't say I like that. I just said I know what it is. It's easy.
So sadism is when you get aroused by hurting someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, masochism is when it's the other way around.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that. For me, like I'm not really. Yeah,
that's like the dominatrix sort of.
Yeah,
it's really about submission, release of control.
Yeah,
which is interesting. I mean, I always find when we move out of the plain pleasure section of sex and we look at how sex allows us to process different emotions and our version of reality, it's interesting because it can be very cathartic in different ways. And I haven't personally dabbled in the waters of BDSM, but I did find it really interesting learning about where it comes from a sense of why people are interested in it, who are interested in it, how it allows them to release control.
He talked about that, and he said it actually goes both ways. I mean, there are people that literally have real PTSD from serious issues, not non-consensual stuff, and that's something that arouses them, but in a way that they know they have control. So they have their safe word or whatever, and and I think all of these things are gonna kind of highlight that we cannot compartmentalize things. Right. We can't just say, here's a script. You need to have missionary position sex 3 times a week. Right. It's like it's all connected to our psyche, our past, our history, our our how we see things, and how what society teaches us. What we watch and like things like that. So, yeah, those are that's the big one. Ropes and bondage.
Oh yes,
ropes and bondage. I think that's fun. Yeah, I've done that. Ropes and bondage.
We'll be editing that out.
Yeah. Dr. Zrenchik recommends that you have a good pair of scissors close by, just in case you have to. I thought that was funny.
Do you keep them like next to the fire hydrant?
Yeah. And safe words. It's important to have. Do you have a safe word?
I don't need one.
You don't? Okay. Well, you might need one before we get to the end of this list. If I start pushing you, then what's your safe word?
I know. I need a safe word. I think it's going to be stop.
Stop. No. Because stop doesn't always mean stop. I'm just kidding. Oh my God. Next one is an hosiery.
Hosiery.
Yeah. Like wearing the hose, like women's like pantyhose and stuff.
Like men wearing women's pantyhose,
or anyone ever wearing pantyhose.
I didn't know that's what it was called, but I've heard of that. I didn't know that's what it was called.
Yeah, I didn't know people really wear. I don't know, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, but I don't even know where to find it. Voyeurism. That's
watching others.
Watching others. Yeah. So that's anybody that has a cell phone could do that now, I guess. Exhibitionism.
I think voyeurism is in person though, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. It is.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Exhibitionism,
showing
others watching
others.
you. Yeah. Role play.
Okay. Cops and robbers. I don't think
that's your thing. Cops and robbers.
I don't think that's a real.
You're the robber.
It depends on the
day. Dirty talk.
Yep. Have you seen I can't believe I'm going to bring this up. Have you seen Scary Movie?
Yeah.
There's the whole sequence with Brenda where he's like, "Oh, talk dirty to me."
She takes it
way too far. And she goes, "Oh, too dirty?"
You always got to be careful.
You need a safe word for that.
Yeah, because I can go a little too far with stuff sometimes, as you can tell. Okay. Europhilia. Throw out a guess as to what that is. Europhilia.
Euro, like EURO?
URO.
Euro. was gonna say love of Europeans. I don't know. What is it?
Water sports.
Oh, urine.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. Not a thing. Not for the kid. Not me. Not for me. Whatever. If you want to do that, but not for me. I didn't think this was really a fetish, or kink, but nipple play. They said humiliation.
Yep.
Humiliation. Yeah. Not.
That one definitely. I've heard of that one too. It kind of goes in the same family with BDSM and bondage and ropes. A little more extreme, but same concept.
But so some of these I just imagine in my mind, like, what if your spouse or your partner surprised you with something on this list?
I think so I don't think you can surprise. I think that there's a whole show on this, which is fascinating. There's a show on Netflix called Bonding, and it's basically about this like high school college girl who is like a secret dominatrix. It's like basically she's like a Hannah Montana of dominatrixes. Like she's one thing during the day, and then at night she's a dominatrix. Okay. And so, but like it's interesting because it does tackle a lot of this type of stuff in terms of, okay, we're on the outside having this discussion, but what is the practical way in which you address that with your spouse? Because especially in a culture where we're conditioned that list is not it. Like you're supposed to be missionary. I mean, it should be like Handmaid's Tale. Like 3 thrust. Yeah. And so how do you engage with a conversation about this in a relationship? Because it's so critical. And I actually think a lot of what I've seen pan out in terms of human sexuality is that it is so important and essential that you can have open dialogue to even be able to identify what it is that you want, because shame plays such a pivotal role in how we perceive what it is that we think we want. Yeah. And that's why we see the most extreme versions of kinks and fetishes in repressed communities and cultures. People that are a little bit more open, it's not that those things don't show up, and I don't think there's anything wrong with them. The expression of your sexuality is a playful thing. But when shame is what's driving it, it warps your understanding of what it is. So when you might want to be spanked, if you have a lot of shame around you, that can quickly become, I want to be humiliated and stomped on. Yeah. Not because that's actually what you want, but because we do this. You
just want to be unrepressed.
We do this thing when we repress, and it's like putting your hands over an open fire hydrant. And so you get all this pressure buildup, and that pressure creates an idea about what you think you want that's not necessarily accurate. So then I see this, I've seen this a lot where people will they will get this warped perception, not only from things that they've seen, but the inability to be open about what it is that they think they might be interested in. And so they go out and they explore this, and they're like, whew, that was not it. I cannot tell you how much I think I'm going to take this year off of sex altogether. And so, but then when they get into a place and communities and involvement where they can talk openly about what they're interested in, they're like, oh, maybe I don't want all that. Maybe I just want a little bit of like.
And that's kind of what I wanted to do here. I wanted to kind of just talk about it and begin that open discussion. Take this back to your spouse, your partner, and talk about some of these things. I would recommend that, like, some of these, when I was talking about like surprising your spouse, don't do that. If you do, have a plan. And like with the humiliation thing, go easy. Like if my wife out of nowhere was like, your feet smell and your nose is crooked and I hate you, like, in the middle of the act, like, I don't know how that would. It wouldn't. Yeah, because you never know. Like, that seriously might not work for the other person. So there's a way to do it and plan it out. Write it down. Practice it in the mirror if you want. Like, start easy.
Well, it's cool. Everybody's different in relationships in terms of like building sexual dialogue and
when you do talk to your spouse, figure out, like, talk about boundaries, and parameters.
Well, it's like I know it's like a funny little song, but it's really like you set it up like, hey, let's talk about sex. Baby, let's talk about you. Like it's funny because what happens, people are really afraid to do that. People are really afraid to talk about.
That's why we're opening it up here.
Yeah, but what happens more often than not is, provided you bridge it in the right way, is that you'll find that both parties are in the same place where they're like, well, I kind of want to talk about, some things too. Like if you come in hot, it's like, we got to talk about this sex.
Because you're not, you're not doing that. Yeah,
this is not it.
Yeah.
I got a list. We got to get through this list.
Yeah. Chris and John said we had to do all of these.
Said we got to do these before Monday. Okay. So, it's a really interesting thing, but it's such a powerful thing. I see there's so much intimacy that can be gained and so much sense of grounding. And when you really start to explore the ability to openly communicate about sex and understand yourself sexually, you see why it's one of the first things we use to disempower people. Because you watch your DGAF-o-meter go straight through the ceiling. Like when you start to feel more, then you stop. The things that you find this weird thing that happens in terms of your psychological balance and your sense of holistic wellness. And then all of a sudden, like, little petty dramas and things and things that destabilize you don't destabilize you in the same way. And it's a really almost weird metaphysical.
It's meant to be there.
Thing.
It's meant to be there to help with the relationship. It really is, I think. Yeah. So next,
and even if you're not in a relationship, I did want to say that too. Yeah. Even if just your own identity with how you feel about yourself and how you feel about your interests and how you feel about investing in that part of your life. It's a part of your life, just like your physical health. You should invest in it. You shouldn't take it backwards and just say, oh, when it comes, it comes. And, invest in understanding what it is that you're interested in.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So very closely related to the humiliation one this is one that I just cannot get on board. I'm sorry. And I know it's gotten to be popular or whatever, or the term at least. Cuckolding.
Oh, yeah, I know what that one is.
So that's, I had to get an actual definition of it. Arousal by the idea of sharing their partner with implied humiliation in not being able to satisfy them.
I've never heard it described that way. Yeah. I thought it was just like watching your partner with somebody else.
Yeah. So like that, like I'm not into the sharing thing anyway, but I'm also a very critical person. So I'd be the one sitting there like, you're not doing that right. Let me
just put,
that
pause. I've got some notes.
That's I'd give you a C-. But I couldn't be down with that. But some people are, I guess, whatever, as long as it's all consensual.
Yeah.
Female-led relationships.
So like the female's the dominant.
The female's the dominant party. Like
is that even in terms of like, there's equipment that can be involved.
That's getting more into the dominating thing or dominatrix type thing. Yeah. And then another one that I thought was weird, financial domination.
I've heard of that.
Where, it's actually a part of the sexual relationship is that like, I will give you this much money to spend per week and I'm in control of that.
Yeah.
And that's,
I've heard of like a form of humiliation where it's like, it's actually close to the dominatrix thing where it's like, you're just like a worthless swine. You're going to pay me this money. And I always wondered after it's done, does he like take the money? He's like, can you give me the, like Monopoly? Like that was really just a prop. Over. Yeah, that was a prop. Like I need all those hundreds.
We were role playing, right? That's yeah. This next one, I have to say, I admit to this one. Okay. Oralism. With an A.
Oralism.
Oralism. AURALISM.
Aura? Like your aura?
It's the sound kink. Like hearing sounds.
Like
is like arousing.
Like what sound? Like the bus?
Like any kind of any kind of sounds like just like like if your spouse is like really quiet and it's like I gotta hear you, you're like make noises
because you said sounds like the fridge, the washing machine. What do you mean?
Yeah, well, some people can. I mean, it can be anything. There's no it can be anything. But yeah, the like sounds. Age play is more like a role playing where you play like someone's much older or
you're getting close to is race play on there as well.
No, it's not.
That's another one. It goes sort of similar to age play, but obviously it's race play.
Yeah. Be careful. I'm trying to imagine. How do you do that anyway?
Well, it's rooted in it's rooted in this ideology about oh God.
Tell us, John.
This is, but it's odd. It's basically like it.
Go on.
It's rooted in racial inequality. So sometimes it can be like people want to be dominated by like a black male, or a black male wanting to be dominated by a white female or male, or it's completely it's partially based out of some sort of stereotype and racial kinks. So
it's amazing how psychological things can just penetrate into the sexual aspect of stuff.
One of my friends said this is the biggest sex organ that we have in the entire body.
Yep.
This thing right here.
Yep. Yeah. So how would a white couple that want to get into the race play, like you said, how would that?
I have no idea. I have no idea. I mean, I don't know any. I'm assuming,
as the expert on this.
I'm not an expert. But my suspicion is that with any of the more extreme kinks, there's usually communities, right? Like there's usually communities where you can find places for safer expression. A more common, less intense fetish kink, I guess, would be like swinging. And swinging has
they have a lot of communities.
Yeah, they have communities. So I think with all of these, depending on the extremeness of it, the prevalence of the community may not be as highly publicized. But because we're speaking about all this without judgment, without this idea that you need to, like, if you like this, like, you need to go pray. Like we're really like, hey, this is a different expression, and there are environments to explore that. And what's interesting that I've seen too is there are more classes on the actual psychology behind some of these, which have become really, they're popping
We're digging
up
deeper.
More.
We're digging deeper into the psyche.
Instead of like, let's dig in. Let's see what is it that attracts you to this. Why? And it's funny, the fact that they have structured educational programs around this kind of helps you understand that there is a very templated psychology behind the desires that are manifesting here.
Yeah.
And how to express those in a way that are not only psychologically beneficial to you, but enriching,
Yeah.
Because I can tell you that, there's sort of like fundamentals of sex. And then when you're getting into some of these things, they're not instinctive. I mean, you might think you kind of are interested in things, but these are kind of like techniques. You need some training to know how to go through humiliation in a way that's not going to actually destroy your psychology. You want to be able to say, okay, what am I trying to experience with this? What am I trying to express with this? And how do I do that in a way that's like, I don't need to just, that I practice this in a psychologically safe way.
Yeah. And to be guided, to be walked through with a guide is really helpful.
Sex therapists.
Yeah.
They're
there's
going to be
they're going to be
now. They're going to be the way of the future, because people are finally
realizing,
realizing, I think I want to still have good sex after the age of 24.
Yeah. Exactly.
I'm like, you haven't even started having good sex at 24. Believe me.
Right. Yeah. So let's see, where were we? Oh, orgasm control.
Okay.
Next one.
Yeah.
I get that one. Impact play. So this kind of goes back to the whole BDSM thing, spanking, whips, like impact. Consensual non-consent.
Oh, is that
consensual non-consent?
That's sort of like rape play sort of stuff?
Yeah, but a consensual version of it. So,
yeah.
Very sometimes, and the doctor described this one too, that sometimes that is tied to past experiences in a negative way, and allowing someone to consensually do it gives you control. So they use it as a technique, and sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes people that don't have a history like are into it. So it's just very open, as long as it's consensual. Gags, little ball gags or whatever. A praise kink. I think I don't know. Like, I'll have to encourage my wife to try this one. I need you to praise me.
Is that like worship? Like worship is there's that's like another name for one of these.
I guess it could go to that.
Usually it's like
complimenting.
I know that I've heard of like the muscle worship where you're really like, that whole ordeal. So I assume that's like a subset of praise.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it would just give my wife more chances to like praise me, which would be good. I'll have to put that on our list. Degradation kink will not be on our list.
Yeah, that's that one. I'm aware of that one.
Yeah. This one I'm sorry, I just don't like blood play.
Ooh.
I just don't, I mean, you can use fake blood or real blood or whatever. Yeah, I'm not a vampire. Okay. Here's another definition for you. Autoplushophobia, or plushophilia, excuse me. Autoplushophilia.
Is that like the choking? Like autoerotic asphyxiation? No? Oh, what is it?
Autoplushophilia.
I don't know.
Furries.
Oh, okay.
Furries.
Okay.
You know, the outfits with
Yeah, the penguins.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's never done it for me. I don't know. Just like, I've never wanted to get after a mascot. I don't know. I never. But hey, you know, it's for some people. They have big conventions and stuff where like everybody's, you know, it's yeah, I want to go. It's just like, no, I do. I love people watching. I love people watching. So, and then mummification is the last one. Like saran wrap, like getting wrapped really tight.
Oh, yeah, or
know?
like the black leather thing where you basically wrap it.
Yeah. So I wanted to put the list out there as a fun way to just kind of open up the extremes of things to know that it's okay.
Yeah.
You know, take your partner, take your spouse to go to a toy store, you know, and some of that can be quite an experience, and the people watching there is pretty fun too.
What's cool too is like, you know, there's this idea, and it makes me laugh, but there really is an idea that like, if you are going to take any sort of steps towards your sexual self-investment or investing in your relationship beyond the most basic ways of like, well, we just need to keep having sex, you know, like, well, let's like, you know, we've been together for a decade. Let's try to turn up the tea. Let's spice it up. There's this idea that you're going to go to a pleasure store, adult store, and they're going to be like, you know, they're very,
look at them on aisle 3.
Yeah. You know, everybody stop and look at aisle 3. You know, but then what you see, if you go look at the reviews, which is, I always tell people like, that's a really good way to kind of get, if you've never done that before, to get yourself comfortable, go look at the reviews, because you see a ton of reviews, and you see a lot by women, which I actually think is an important marker. Not from any sort of a you know, gender place, other than, you know, we don't live in a culture that supports women investing in their sexuality. So when you see women giving positive reviews,
means something.
It means that you're in a safe space for that.
Yeah.
But these people really do care about what they do. I've seen that they care about their work. And that's because we are not used to thinking of self-investment in our sexuality as an actual vertical, you know, like for people to study and understand. So you go in and they'll tell you about all the vibrators. They'll tell you, you don't need to go in and have your, you know, you don't need to go to ChatGPT and be like, how do I do this? You know, like you can go in and just say, hey, we're just
and be open,
checking this out, and
be open and talk about
and
it.
They'll whip out that list and be like, okay, I'm gonna read your list. Tell me if any of this interests you. I'll take you to the aisle.
Yeah, they are the least judgmental people on the planet. Like, I can promise you that, because they see it all.
Yeah,
you know. So moving on to that, I wanted to talk a little bit about just touch on some of those the parts of communication.
Cool.
You know, how specifically do you sit down and talk about something like this? You know, because it's also it's also a very touchy subject for people too. Yeah. You know, they don't always, or they might feel offended if you're coming at them a certain way, or like, oh, this is something that, you know, that in my culture we just don't talk about. Yeah. You know, or in my upbringing, like, you know.
Well, there's an expectation, and this is something that every individual has to gauge themselves on the nature of their own relationship and the level of communication that they have in that relationship. But I always think it's important for everyone to grasp that we are not trained in sex. We are not, especially in this country, we are really taught, like our sex ed is really like disease focused. It's really, really, we get it in middle school. We're like, if you shake hands, you're going to get chlamydia. You know, it's a fear-based system.
It is.
So, you know, there is and then we learn what we learn from like either really bad television that makes, you know, I saw this great comedian that was like, we need accurate representations of sex in movies. Cause
no.
You know, she's like, it's horrible. And you know, the women are frustrated because and then you watch the movies and it's like, well,
it doesn't go like
I don't think that's how that goes. You know, it's like always, you know, perfect and roses falling out of the ceiling and like, you know, but the other thing is that we have to be able to take a step back before we have those conversations. And even in my relationship, we always preface them with like, hey, can we talk about sex right now? And it gives everybody a second to get like, okay, I got to be on my best behavior. I've got to make sure that I'm not projecting my own insecurities so that I can listen. You know, if you just go in, you know, on the way down in the kitchen, pouring milk in the coffee, you're like, so like that thing you did last night, let's talk about it. That was not good. You know, like, you got to set it up for a moment. Yeah. And understand that the same way that you invest in your exercise, the same way you invest in your mental wellness, hopefully the same ways that you invest in your professional life, you should invest in your sexual life and understand that like we don't go to work and expect that we do everything perfectly all the time.
Mm-hmm.
We don't expect that we go to school already knowing everything that we are going to learn.
Yeah.
And that if we get commentary on our writing, that we're just dumb, bad writer, this, that, and the. But more than that, because we are individuals, we have to learn the sexual language of our partners.
Yes.
And we have to communicate our sexual language to our partners.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, there's no harm, no foul in like, hey, these are the things that I really like. What do you really like? How do we find that overlap if there is places where there can be more overlap? And it's not a statement about your inadequacy, but there's this idea, and men really struggle with this. There's this idea that I'm just supposed to be able to throw down.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
you know, I'm the stallion.
Yeah. And you just need to put out more.
Yeah. And like, if you don't like it, it's because there's something wrong going down. You know, but on a subliminal level, the idea is equally pressure ridden for men as women, because there's this idea that you should just know how to show up and be good in bed.
That's
you should
true
just
too.
know.
Yeah.
And especially for men, because they don't learn the biology of women very well, and it's a little bit more complex than what we got going on down south. You know, ours is a little bit easier in a lot of ways to kind of go through the process with, and we're not educated on that. So that communication is like pivotal to be able to have a successful, enriching relationship, and on the scientific side to get all that oxytocin, all that dopamine flowing, all those.
We're gonna get into that next.
Yeah,
actually, yeah. So that level of communication and being unafraid and willing and open to talk about that is without any kind of animosity or purpose behind it, but just to learn and study one another is pivotal. It's so key. You know, now we're going to get into the science, like the chemistry of it all. So I love this part.
Put on that hat.
Yes, I love it.
You got your laser pointer?
Yeah, I know. So what happens chemically? Like we see a lot of people that struggle. There are a lot of sexual struggles and issues, conditions, that can be rather complex, when it comes to sex, because sex by itself, the ability to actually have sex, it requires, especially for just for a man, as an example, it requires the plumbing to work downstairs. And then it also requires, the arousal, the libido. Libido is different than being able to have sex. Libido is the drive to want to.
So there's like the software and the hardware. Yeah,
very much so. Yes. Yeah. So libido is up here, and then, the function itself is down there. So how does all that happen? How does the brain figure all this out? Does it always get it right? No, it doesn't, and there's a lot of things that can impact that. One of the first things that we go through when I see someone that's having difficulty with these things, I ask about how they're doing. How is their life? How's their stress level? Because stress is the killer of all body chemistry. Like it ruins everything. So if you have a couple that comes in, they're struggling, they're not having as much sex as they'd like to, and there's a level of underlying stress somewhere, then that you can't fix the problem without addressing that, and figuring that where that's at. So it's just that right there. But then as we get into things, there's several hormones that have a huge impact when it comes to sexual function. So one of the most powerful hormones in your body for men and women is testosterone. So that has a lot to do with both ends, the hardware and the software. So big time increase in your sex drive. Like I saw a couple, they were in their late 60s. And very, very sweet, like a little couple. And the wife called me up after she had been on therapy for about 3 months, and she and her sex drive was like non-existent for decades, and she said she said, Chris, I finally understood for the first time why guys are the way they are. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? And she said, well, you know how guys will have posters of women in the garage, and they'll call their car, a lady's name, and they're always like, their eyes are always wandering at women all the time, and they're chasing their wives around and everything, and they seem to have sex on the brain all the time. And in comparison to like, when I just never thought about it. And that's what I thought was a big difference between men and women. Until you corrected my testosterone level. Now that my testosterone is where it should be, I finally get it. Now my husband can't keep up with me. I'm chasing him around the house everywhere.
We had a patient who he was like, yeah. I was like, oh, how are you doing? He was like, I'm good, but my girlfriend's running from me. I'm trying to repopulate the planet.
Yeah. Yep.
And she had been complaining that he had no sex drive.
Yeah.
And now she needs vacation.
Yeah.
She's like, could you take him back off?
Yeah. Yep. That's
it wasn't so bad before.
One of the biggest reasons why, like, I'll get started with a husband maybe, and then the spouse will come along. Oh my gosh, the sex drive, his energy level.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the testosterone's a big deal. Estrogen too, finding the estrogen balance. You don't want too much estrogen, you don't want too little, and everybody has their own sweet spot. But estrogen does play a part in not only your libido, your motivation, but your erectile function too. And for women, for keeping everything going and lubricated down there too during sexual activity. Oxytocin.
The bonding
Yeah, the love hormone.
Mm-hmm.
Oxytocin is a very interesting hormone. They call it the bonding hormone. There's several times in your lifespan where oxytocin peaks. Oxytocin is the hormone that's produced in the brain once a woman has their baby. Mm-hmm. Once the baby comes out, a flood of oxytocin comes in. That's where a lot of the hormonal bonding comes into play for your child. And that oxytocin goes down to the breast tissue to stimulate milk production too. Okay. So that's it's an interesting pathway. But then there's also oxytocin that's flooded, on your first date, or like, your first kiss and stuff like that. So like, and oxytocin is one of those things that they've been kind of speculating that it does fade, as relationships get older, but there's ways to spark that back up again. Let's do something fun, let's do something crazy. So like that's an important one too. There are ways to supplement oxytocin. Not everybody needs it. It kind of depends, how well it works. But I've prescribed it before. Dopamine, and so yeah, you're the dopamine like science
the
king.
Junkie, the dopamine junkie. But that's the
reward.
The reward hormone.
Yeah, the
reward neurotransmitter.
Mm-hmm. Very, very important and involved in this. Norepinephrine and epinephrine; those are both highly involved, more in the act of an orgasm itself. And that, I can geek out on that for 30 minutes, like just how the chemistry goes into play for how we have being in the sexual act. And then something changes to the point where you have an orgasm. For men, it's actually different than women.
It's interesting, and we will have to do another episode to talk about it, because I did this whole tantric exploration. I'd done like tantric classes to kind of, and it led me on a geek out about this exactly, because they're talking about how you can have what they call like a full body orgasm without actually orgasming. And so, I've got the part of me that processes things esoterically, and then I've got the part that's the scientist that is like, well, we use words, but those words tend to be describing an actual scientific biological function. Exactly. So it's like, I'm moving the energy. I'm like, that's biochemistry. So what is the energy? It's going to be neurotransmitters, it's going to be hormones, and it's going to be linked to physical things that are happening in the body. And so what is it that's actually happening? So we'll have to geek out on it, because it's really interesting to see what your body is doing as you go through from arousal to an actual release, if you do have a release, and sort of what are the chemicals that are kind of running through your body when you're in these states of arousal, and what that's called, like the tantric energy is actually just your chemical cocktail, what your body is released into when you are turned on. Yeah,
a lot of carryover among the different like types of ways of learning about this stuff. So yeah, those are the primary hormones. But like I said, stress is a big deal. Mental health is a huge deal. Big has a lot of carryover that can really rob you of a lot of your sexual function, sexual activity. There are certain types of mental health issues that cause hypersexuality. I'm trying to find a way to feed that. Too much. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I want to inject her with it or something. No, I'm just joking. I'm just kidding. No, she's great. She's great. But no, there are certain types of conditions that actually have that. Like I actually saw a patient once, and this was when I was doing my rotation in gynecology. It was oncologic gynecology, actually. So just for cancer. So this patient came in, and she was not kidding. She has repetitive orgasms.
I've heard
like
of that.
Yeah, and like over and over and over
It's
again.
very uncommon.
Yeah, it's rare, and she was probably middle aged, and she came into the office, and it comes out of nowhere, so it is about what you would imagine.
Yeah,
we're sitting here talking.
It's such a thing that I know they did. They've had TV shows where they had like that character on the show.
Yeah, it was like So she did it like in front of me, and I was like, I was like the Shaggy. I was just like the Shaggy song. I was like, it wasn't me. It wasn't me.
I'm gonna come back. I'm gonna come back in 10 minutes. I'm gonna come back.
It wasn't me.
Push this button when I can re-enter the room.
I didn't do it. I'm good, but I'm not that good. It wasn't me.
The Shaggy. It wasn't me.
And then I tried to do it again. I was like, bam.
What are you, Shazam?
She's like, what are you doing? But no, actually, it was. She had a. I think she had a mass. She had a tumor that was pushing on her. I think part of the clitoris and in there somewhere.
Yeah,
it was inducing it. So, yeah, but
that's wild.
So those things are interesting. The medication, especially the mental health medications, the SSRIs, big problem. That robs you. It just crashes it.
And I'm glad that you brought this up because we can't overtly say this in consultation, but in the purposes of an educational setting, I can say definitively, do your homework on SSRIs.
Preach.
Because they are not good for you. And of course, you got to work it out with your psychiatrist. So you can't just go on your own and take yourself off of them. But understand that we live in a society where that's the
sometimes they're necessary, but they are not free of charge. Like there are risks. There are big risks involved.
It's no joke. I mean, we live in a society that is quick to SSRIs because they don't have the standard side effects that we consider problematic, like addiction or things that we sort of look at and we say, well, that's like gonna do this. It actually really goes in alignment with how we view sex as a culture in general. Like, well, your sex drive might drop, but that's a totally fine thing. Yeah, and you might gain weight, you might do, but better than being sad. And they won't really dig. I've seen that sometimes you do have major depressive disorder, and there are definitely a lot of roots to look at that. But I have a really close friend in New York who they put on SSRIs just because it was winter. I was like,
seasonal depression disorder,
which I have too. But it's a very extreme response to seasonal depression.
Well, think about it though. If you have 7 minutes to take something out of your toolbox and give to someone that is sad or whatever, like and if you have 7 minutes, like, and the right thing to do is to, we need to look at your lifestyle. We need to look at your health. We need to look at how, what your diet. We need to look at like how you see the world. We need to look at all of these things in order to truly answer this appropriately. Oh, time's up. I'd love to get into it.
That was my whole. I used my whole time for that.
Yeah, like you can't do that. So like, but an SSRI, you can knock that out in 7 minutes.
Oh, and they do.
They do, and that's my big rub.
I've been through this journey, and I was glad that I was so terminally willful because they have tried to put so many things in my body, and I stuck with diet and exercise. Yeah. And most of them were just age related. Most of them were just typical things you go through as you're going through your journey of development. And I encourage, which we do every episode, we encourage people, do your homework and don't take for granted that the people that you work with always have your best interests. Mm-hmm. Don't take that for granted. I mean, we always encourage people to challenge with questions, really think through, but don't take for granted that you're going to go to the doctor and they have taken time to consider, or that they even have enough information about you to really give you much of anything. You should take the feedback and then do research and find specialists and cross-reference. And you will find that over time you get into a rhythm and a flow, and there is more information even accessible, just directly. You don't necessarily need to, but enough to be able to look and say, ooh, because what you'll find more often than not is that when you can start with just looking at the side effects of some of the things that you might be prescribed. And just that will be like, ooh, well, my doctor didn't mention any of this.
Yeah.
they skipped over that part.
Or ask. It's always good whenever you see a doctor, ask, what can I do?
Yeah.
On my own.
Yeah.
You know, always, every single time, I don't care what the condition is, you should always be asking that.
Yeah.
You know, and it'll startle them at first. They're like, well,
you should listen to me.
You could just listen to me. You know? So, well, but what can I do on my own?
Yeah.
Well, I guess you could change your diet. I guess you could exercise, or I guess you could do this, or I guess you could get outside. If it's seasonal depression disorder, like I guess you could get outside. You could get like the lighting therapy.
The big lighting therapy.
You know, we could put you on vitamin. You could take a vitamin D supplement that you can pick up at Walgreens. You know, you can get out and exercise more, and
you can have more social interactions. More social stimulation.
Oh, look at that! There's all kinds of stuff.
Things you can do before taking. Yeah, I really think that. And, you know, obviously we have this whole new psychedelic space that has really promising science. It's always had promising
amazing
science.
Yeah.
And for its efficacy and how well tolerated it is, how few side effects you have. But regardless, you should always, always, always start with what am I doing in my lifestyle? Even in the clinic, we do that. We look, before we start throwing syringes at you, we look at where's your baseline? You know, before we can even do that. We really want to know. Hey,
it's the only right way to do it.
What are you doing baseline, just so that we know what we're working with? Because you're not. We don't want to be any more proponents of a completely chronic treated society. We want to be supporting preventive and optimized health. Not just like being another stamp that's like, well, we're demonizing these drugs, but we're just gonna do the same thing. We're just gonna throw a different drug at you and not ask you any questions about what you're doing.
Because we do a 360-degree. What is that? Impact play?
Exactly. That
was. So yeah, at Living 360, that's what we do. So let's see. Okay, so we went through that. Definitely a lot. And other things in regards to chronic illness. Certain chronic illnesses can have a big impact on your sexual function too. Diabetes is probably the most popular one. Heart disease, you know, is a concern, and obesity, you know, and so my point with that is that everything is connected. You cannot compartmentalize sexual health from health and fitness and wellness and longevity. Yeah. Like you just can't separate it. You know, so keeping all that in mind is a good deal. Things that you can do, lifestyle things you can do to improve, you know, your sexual function, really is not that. It's not that independent. I mean, it just goes along with stuff you should be doing anyway. Yeah. You know, getting yourself on a good exercise routine, cardiovascular health. That means getting out and doing some aerobic exercise, getting your steps in. You know, on a regular basis, it's the momentum of those things.
Sleep.
You know, that get you going. Sleep is the next one. You know, all of that's huge. You know, sleep is a very, very big aspect for everything in your body, literally everything. Hormone regulation. There's something about aging that once we get into our mid-20s or so, early 20s, mid-20s, our bodies are hormonally very, very optimal. Your body produces hormones that send signals to dictate the mood that your body is in. As we age, time, life on earth, stress, babies, you know, relationships, all kinds of stuff happen. You know, our bodies get less and less optimal at producing these signaling hormones that set the mood for our body is in. So like if we're not producing melatonin as much as we used to,
sleep,
then you ain't gonna be sleeping as well as you used to. Like it's a very direct correlation. You know, so same thing here. And so now we have the ability to focus in and really fine tune, you know, those hormones, you know, so which is huge for people, huge.
So we're in our last minute. So what I do want to ask is if you have one sort of key takeaway that you could tell not only our patients, but anybody who's listening to the podcast when it comes to sexual health, whether that's one key thing that they can do or one key belief system they can address, what would it be?
That's a tough one. I would say let go of the obstacles and the boundaries. And sometimes we do that with humor, you know. Sometimes we just have fun, you know, and just with your spouse or with your partner, or even just with yourself. Just like, don't be so uptight about things. Just talk about things. It's a very normal, natural thing. Be open to the idea of exploring, you know, your own psyche, not just sexually, but everything, you know. And the more we feel less suppressed to do that, you know, the more we start learning about ourselves, and we begin appreciating not only ourselves but our partners and our spouses too.
Right. I love that. I love that. I think my biggest takeaway, my biggest thing that I would want to communicate is that it is our birthright as humans to have a healthy sexual relationship with ourselves and others. So anyone, any institution, any body that tells you that you are not entitled to a happy, healthy, fulfilling, enriching, playful, spontaneous sex life is not your friend and is not worth the time it takes to listen.
That's right.
So
that is true. That's a good
remember
one.
that. Remember that, and dive in like you dive into anything else in your life that you geek out on.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
So we will definitely do another episode on this because this is a really fun topic.
So we're gonna stop. This is it. Are you using your safe word?
I'm using my safe. Stop. Stop. I can't do anymore.
Kumquat.
Kumquat. Right. We will do another episode because this is such an interesting thing, and we always find I see it in the clinic a lot. This is a topic that patients don't necessarily come to, but as soon as it comes out, the phone
comes out.
and people are like, well, I saw that last text. Could you talk to me about something? Now, I was listening to Kinks numbers 7 through 12. And I want to know medically, how can I?
We're going to hear it.
So then we will do another one because I want to definitely geek out on, in our industry more specifically, all of the different ways that we biohack this.
We have a lot. There's a lot of tools.
And understanding them because, you know, if you listen to this podcast, you will get about 5,000 ads on your Instagram for Tadalafil in the next 5 to 10 minutes after you've listened to it. So, you know, not only will we do a little geek out to kind of go through how these work, where they work, things that work for sexual dysfunction for women too, because there are a lot of awesome biohacks for women.
Oh yeah.
It's not just men, things that work on the software and the hardware, and how to differentiate what's going to work well for you and what to ask questions about so that you don't get inundated by the boner pill market, which is like
it is a thing.
Really, really going up. But
kumquat.
Oh, well, thank you guys for joining us. My name again is Jonathan Davis.
Chris Neal.
This is Living 360, and we will see you next time.
Thank you guys. Stay healthy.